Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very 17th episode of Rethink Everything. It is a 23rd week of 2020. I'm here, or my name is Tyler Giannassini, and I'm here with Kent Yoshimura.
Hi. It's not much to
Yeah,
say. Sorry.
yeah, we're feeling, I think, as awkward and confused as everybody else might be if you're listening to this podcast at a later date. This is the week that the bill came due for police violence in this country. There are protests um, in basically every major city. Uh, People are getting killed. People are getting injured. This is coming from protests over the death of George Floyd at the hand of police officers in Minneapolis. Um, and yeah, we don't really have an agenda other than we don't know how to talk about anything else this week, and figured we might as well kind of share in that experience with our audience.
It's pretty remarkable what people can do when they come together. And, it's so I live in Los Angeles. I live in like the heart of Los Angeles. So, like 2 blocks away from me, it's very obvious that the protests are happening. I hear rubber bullet gunshots, or what I assume are gunshots coming from the rubber bullet shooters. Um, I hear those popping off in the middle of the night. In the morning, I get woken up to sirens, and while I don't hear the people, um, the the intensity is there, and it's it's interesting. So, like yesterday, for example, I went in to be in the thick of it to a degree, while trying to also maintain some level of social distancing because of COVID still happening, which is also crazy. There's no real conversation or discourse happening, and it makes me wonder. The protesters have a voice. They're talking. They're communicating what they want to communicate, and then on the other side, the cops are just standing there holding machine guns, and it just makes you think like what. How do we just better communication? How can discourse occur on both ends, create discussion, create a conversation? Because right now it does feel so split between just, I mean, everything just feels so split. So,
Yeah, I think there've been a few places where you see some actually decent efforts. So there was the sheriff where they laid down their weapons. I don't know if they
mhm.
laid them down, but they took off their riot gear and marched with the protesters. There was talk about some of the police officers in, I think, Portland kneeling uh, in front of the protesters and like trying to, I guess, express solidarity in that way. But then for each one of these that I see, I also read that somewhere else in that city, they're loosing tear gas and shooting people with rubber bullets and arresting and assaulting people. And it
Yep.
seems even the police force is split in their response, and some of them are obviously a lot clumsier or more clueless than others. Which is not to rag on them. My father was a police officer. They're ultimately, at the end of the day, just people. They all have problems with each other. I remember my dad having issues with people on who were part of his department who he felt were clumsy and callous with the way they treat the public, or power hungry, or whatever that strain of emotion or whatever that is that seems to run through a lot of the worst officers. Uh, but yeah, it's challenging because every single police department across the U.S. is going to have to come up with their own response, and a lot of them are not prepared to be politicians.
Yeah, they're not. It's interesting. I was talking to my friend Sean Mira, who's an unbelievable activist within the little Tokyo community, and I, I was having the same discussion on like where is the conversation happening, and the fact that the bureaucracy almost contains conversation into City Hall and not outside of it is it almost prevents the cops themselves or the police officers or even the protesters, the people that live in the city, the entire the entirety of everyone to not have a level of transparency in in the conversation. It's
Yeah.
There's also a part where like the cops themselves are, you know, many of them I assume were just given the marching orders where you are
Hmm.
there, you hold strong to your weapons, stand your ground, don't try to incite anything. Obviously, because things can get misconstrued, words can get misconstrued, but it's complicated. It's absolutely complicated, and
Yeah.
yeah,
I got to imagine things are also. I mean, across cities they all vary, but in a lot of the major cities, I have to imagine you're finding a lot of ex-military joining the police force, and they are, you know, trained for a different job than being a policeman is, despite maybe having some relevant experience to that position and the discipline required. Um, Not all of them are trained for humanitarian efforts, and that
right,
obviously shows. If you send only the police and not any elected officials to have a discussion, then we've seen how it goes over and over and over and over and over.
that's why diplomacy exists. That's why diplomats are a role. Who is the diplomat at this level? Who should be the diplomat? It's the one that could I get could bridge the divide and create proper communication.
Right? Yeah. I mean, anyone. If you've got huge crowds of angry people who want someone to hear them, and you send no ears but only fists and force, they're not going to feel heard, and then they're going to feel like the only way to be heard is through the methods that you're communicating with them with. This is
Absolutely.
show up with force, get greeted with force, and
The
it's
unfortunate thing,
crazy
though,
we
is
haven't figured it out yet.
it's become so ingrained within the culture and in the psyche of the people that even when protesters are very calmly protesting, they're taking the peaceful stance. You see the footage on the media of police violence, and
Hmm.
I was actually thinking about like this other day. I don't think looting is good. I don't think any form of violence is good. Just in my own belief system, I think violence is the worst way to communicate things. But at the same time, like it's gotten to a point where, unfortunately, violence is the only way to get your voice heard in many situations. And I like all things, there's going to be opportunists on both sides. The looting is going to happen no matter what, but we shouldn't, and we should absolutely not do that. I don't condone that by any means whatsoever. I think it's actually absolutely terrible and sets people back. But it's something that is already going to happen, and we're going to expect to happen. And on the other end of things, there's the opportunists on the police force side that's going to try to look at for any moment of violence to react
Hmm.
in a certain way, and those are
Hmm.
as bad as the looters. On either end of the spectrum. It's within the middle ground though. Like, how do we look at those two extremes, the opportunists, the false conversations, the dichotomies that are getting pushed into the media, who, I was saying this the other day, but like, they're the greatest opportunists of all, because all of a sudden they could push whatever narrative that they want now. If it's like police brutality, it's how do we as people candidly talking like this on podcasts? How do we as people candidly talking out on the streets? How can that communication become more pervasive across the people? It's
Yeah,
sorry, it's so hard for me
I
to talk right now. There's like it's there's billions of thought processes of the madness of what's going on.
yeah,
So
yeah.
uh,
It's challenging. I mean, I agree with you as far as the stance on violence, but that and also agree that at this point, like, I don't understand how else do you get the message across? How else do you get across to people? Here's what it feels like when you have to be afraid every day of just walking down the street. Here, here is what it feels like to not know whether your family is going to be safe while they're just walking down the street. This is the only way to express that seems to really get through. And so,
mm,
I certainly think like looting a small business owner is it's not the ideal message. But at the same time, I can't like I think jumping on the like look how horrible these looters are is like one of those it it perverts the message. If you felt like
agree.
looting small shit, yeah, like if looting small businesses is where the line is, sorry, but you missed your chance to kind of speak up. Like, I think the line was years and years and years and years and years ago when we started finding this trend where um, law enforcement can kill people and get away with it.
Exactly. It's within a spectrum, and it's looting is also a response to the the infrastructure that's been set in place.
Totally.
And
400 years of all right. I as a community, we've tried every other way to get a piece of this, and if this is the only way I'm ever going to get a piece in my lifetime, I'm going for it. And I can't blame that thought
yep,
process. Yeah, of course. Why wouldn't you?
yeah. While I don't condone it, it is absolutely,
Yeah,
it
it
happens for a reason.
right. Yeah, it's like I guess justified isn't quite the right word, but it's not like you have to do too many mental gymnastics to put in yourself in a place where um, that's a pretty that decision becomes a lot less like about taking a moral stand and just about like, all right, there's I'm never going to get another. That's survival at that point. Survival motivates that decision.
Yeah, the most and survival is the most basic human
Right.
need. uh, yeah. Um, there's also this, just on the topic of looting, I guess. Uh, there's just a few comments that I just see on Instagram and social media, just in general, of people trying to justify certain things, and obviously, it's nothing is binary. Like, uh, everything exists within its own realm as nuanced responses to very nuanced uh, aspects of history and built-in societal issues. But um, people talk about, like, oh, at least these small business owners can uh, get their money back from insurance, or at least these. That is in no way justification to promote looting, but on the to add on to that as well, insurance is never going to pay for these people. Like they're going to find every single excuse. And as a small business owner, like we've gone through it, insurance is going to find every way to not pay out. And
Yeah,
it, it makes one question like, how many layers can we look for change and reform then? Like, if we know looting is going to happen and then the insurance companies are going to continue to screw the small business owners over, should we also be looking at reform at the insurance company level? If that's
absolutely.
right,
Yeah, force them to pay out in these scenarios, and all of a sudden they become advocates for more appropriate response to protests. All of a sudden they become advocates for causes which prevent the types of actions like this that wind up causing protests in the first place, because they need to minimize their risk. Currently,
exactly.
their risk is they just don't care because they don't have to.
Yeah, like no. Obviously, there's a larger conversation piece going on with the protests and the systemic racism, but there are. I don't know if you hear the police sirens constantly going on in the
Oh
back. I
yeah,
don't know if my
yeah, right.
microphone's. Yeah, um, but there needs. I'm so curious how, as a society, we're going to dive deeper into systemic issues, insurance, healthcare. The conversations are there, but we're not protesting it so overtly. It's But unless all those issues are changed, then we're always going to be in a world of opportunists trying to screw other people over to get an upper hand.
Yeah, the layers and layers and layers of difficulty to change anything like this, unless you happen to have $1 billion in your bank account, is pretty challenging.
Yeah. Do you did your dad ever, you might have been too young, but did your dad ever talk about like the 92 riots? Uh, when, I assume he was
He was, I mean,
like in
no,
tune with it to a degree.
I I don't think anything would have happened in Olympia. I think at that time,
Hmm.
the the sort of evergreen like student protest community wasn't quite as militant as they are now, and then they're just, the reality of it is there were not that many minorities here, because our military base just moved in and kind of changed the population probably like 15-20 years ago, something like that. And so that now it's a lot more diverse here, but I think at that point it was just sort of it wasn't an issue that affected Olympia.
That's that's so interesting. Like versus you would say the riots, the protests, the death of George Floyd, like all these things happening now are in fact a part of like how is it affecting Olympia or like a small town? Like it's definitely a part of the conversation and the narrative in your
There,
town as well, right?
yeah, but I think I don't. There were so few. There were very few people who actually went out. I think it was like people were talking about like there's two or three people that went downtown. I think um, I don't know. I don't know what really did it, because there's always protesters of one kind or another downtown in Olympia. Like when there's not national protesting going on, you'll always find like a little group of people down there, with signs up for one thing or another, because it's just like it's a really political community. I don't know
Hmm.
if nothing happening right now is because of COVID, or if if the presence of if the presence of the military base just means that we're not necessarily like, hey, we're going to run right out and protest. Um, I don't know. I don't know if it's just changed the dynamics or what, but yeah, there's nothing too much happening here. One
Yeah.
one thing I do remember my dad telling me about was the it was oh, I'm gonna have to look it up, but it was some sort of Queen Anne, where he went to high school in Seattle. Uh, there were I can't remember if it was riots or not. Um, but somewhere in Seattle, it was like um, post Civil Rights Act, just like racial tensions, and a story I always remember that has is like fundamental to who I am and what I believe. Like since I was a little kid, he told me about being at high school and walking down the hallway toward one of his classes and finding that a group of his friends had pinned this black kid up against the lockers and saw him coming and said, "Hey, Thor, you want to help us fight this black kid?" And um, my dad went and stood next to the kid, and they asked him what he was doing, and he said, "Oh, I thought you wanted help. It seemed like it was an unfair fight." Uh,
Wow.
and that is just like my dad wasn't like a storyteller or a boaster, so I don't really like. It sounds like bullshit, but I he was an extremely principled human being, and so I don't believe he would lie to me for for any reason, for
I
self
mean, this
glorification or anything like that.
when I was up there and like there was like a hill you pointed at. And it was like, yeah, that's uh, my dad like stood next to like. Sorry, I'm like misremembering the story probably, but you're pointing at like different things. It's like, yeah, my dad as like the as as a detective like helped do this, like he
Oh
helped
yeah,
perform
yeah,
this, like
yeah. So the law enforcement memorial here. So obviously, I've got is it like some fairly emotional ties to both sides of this. Just because I think ever since probably the second or third grade, I've been obsessed with Martin Luther King, and felt that obsessed with the civil rights movement. And then on the other hand, uh, you know, I, I I come from police blood, so there's these two passions at play here, or whatever they
interesting
are.
opposing forces
Right.
in many ways. Yeah,
In many ways, yeah, but in many ways, no. Like I know for
exactly.
a fact that my dad would be disgusted with the way that. I mean, he would be disgusted with the lack of taking responsibility. I think, or
Yeah,
overall,
yeah. I mean, I'm curious. I'm,
uh,
I'm curious how like the bureaucracy, because people like your dad would, you know, he would take the actions and the steps necessary to change the bureaucratic system of the police force, the thought processes to have them stand for protecting the people again, like
yeah.
what the morals of which why police
I say
exist.
he was always one to piss off his superiors and his peers, because I'd say in any organization large enough, people with principles become an inconvenience.
Yeah, a- absolutely. They want pawns,
Right. Yeah. Pawns and tools, and
pawns and tools, and docile folk.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. It's a weird time. It's just like, well, I guess I was thinking just a moment ago, like like to our listeners, you're probably going to hear, you have heard us so far chuckle a few times, and you probably will continue to hear us chuckle. And if that, don't let that be an indication that this isn't a drag to us. I think both of us would probably freely admit to being the type of people that laugh when we're in
It's
pain.
like yeah,
Um,
it's nervous. It's when you yeah, it's like nervous laughter. It's
yeah,
like that's the only way I could
it's resorting to laughter. Yeah,
right. Like humor and laughing is the only way that I could deal with many of the the anxiety inducing issues at hand and
yeah,
um
because the other emotion is crying, and
or right.
that's kind of on the that's my I like to read Reddit before I go to sleep, at night like an idiot, and the last 2 nights have just gone to sleep with tears in my eyes because the just seeing everything that's happening, and it's still happening and people are still dying. Um,
Dude, it's crazy.
it's it's a real nightmare, and the fact that it's all happening during COVID is, in one way, it's in one way, there's a part of me that's glad because it means that the protesters don't have to stop.
Yeah.
I think they usually are sort of at the mercy of needing to get back to work and make money, and I think this time around, um, we're not going to have the response from these cities is not going. You can't just make it. Oh, we'll just wait for it to blow over. They got to go back to work on Monday. In one way, I'm glad about that. In another way, obviously, I'm not, because people are losing their lives, and eyeballs and brain cells. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I guess the flip of that is that in a few weeks here, we get to look forward to a huge boom of new cases from COVID, which is just going to add to the pain of all this.
Man, it's it's yeah.
This will become, I think, in the as far as the U.S. story of how the pandemic went, this is about to become the biggest event thus far.
Agree. Talk. You know, on like WhatsApp, I have my international friends that have texted me, and it's very. Let me just pull up what they're saying, because it's so interesting the way things do get reported outside the U.S. And I guess the way it's being reported, at least in Asia, is it's just absolute chaos here. Um, but here it is. I'm just gonna read this. Dude, are you okay over there? I said it's fine. It's only a few blocks away from you, so it's a bit crazy. How's it being reported out of state? It looks nuts over there. Depressing to read about it over here, and I can't imagine what it's like. But the narrative is largely around police brutality, um, and public disorder. And so I said, I mean, that's fairly accurate. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but he also said the false narratives that both the U.S. and the Chinese government are promoting are absolutely infuriating, and the rest of the world sees that. So
Yeah,
it's yeah,
always good to be put in the same category as China as far as lying to people.
isn't that yeah? How painfully similar this country we paint out as this evil force. How how painfully similar we are in all the
Right.
bad ways.
Yeah.
No one likes looking at their own reflection.
I didn't read much about it, but I'm seeing that um, there's protesting in Japan over police brutality at the same
Oh, the
time, and
Kurdish.
then
Yeah.
Israel, and then in Israel, what they killed a an autistic Palestinian man, which
Wow.
has led to riots there as well.
Gosh, that's yeah.
The world's insane right now.
You know, I'm trying to figure out how to stay hopeful, because I could only imagine, like you, Ryan, you'll like the people just, and I'm just using Neuro as an example, just because it's so just relevant to us. But you know, we have to maintain kind of the optimism and hopefulness
Hmm.
within the company, or else it's like you hear it in people's voices, like you hear it in like our
Yeah.
coworkers' voices and our teammates' voices of just like, wow, what's the point of it? Like, what is the point of anything? What is going to happen? What's there's It's harder and harder to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Uh, but at the same time, the light at the end of the tunnel is, if we could get through this, the protesters, the virus, the things that are really going to result in hopefully systemic change, then the future, that light at the end of the tunnel is so much brighter. It's going to be like a light that's so much brighter than any light that we've been living in. So I don't know. It takes pressure to make a diamond, and I
Yeah.
think that's just what we're going through right now. Hopefully,
They say the Great Depression forged the people that came out of it and gave them the character that they had. I
yep.
I mean, I now kind of wonder about that because as it stands, we were already in a situation where a huge number of people in as young adults were living with their parents to begin with to start this whole thing. Um, more than ever before. I wonder, is this? And I know, uh, my mom and stepdad, their business is obviously getting affected by this. I wonder if this is affecting them almost more than it's going to. It One would think that by that age you're like stable and you've got it, you're good.
Mhm.
And now if they are, small business owners who can't make money right leading up to retirement, was that due? Um, yeah, I don't know. I just wonder, who this is going to impact most at this point.
Yeah, yeah. Those
I mean,
are some of the funds that aren't being talked about, or when the communication happens around charity or advocating for a movement. It's who are the who is it that's going to be disenfranchised even further than they are now? Like, who is it that is, after all this is over, that's going to need our help? Um,
right. It's sure going to take a giant bite out of the middle class, I think. Um,
I definitely
like everything
agree with
else
that.
over the past 20 years.
The the middle of the hourglass is going to continue to become thinner and thinner,
Hmm.
and the top and the bottoms are going to be, yeah. I mean, it's already happening with the recession and the bailouts, the people getting the loans, the smaller companies being bought up by big corporations. It's
Hmm.
they're going to continue to the larger corporations are continuing to get stronger, get bailed out. Yeah,
It's weird times. Um,
it is indeed.
I saw on footage of the Seattle riots, the Chanel getting robbed, and I appreciated that.
That's if you are going to rob or loot anything, it's yeah. Why a small business? Like
Yeah, be
why your
target
local co-op?
target it.
It's like yeah.
Go after the people that can afford to lose that.
I posted something my friend fun. He lives in Minneapolis. He's also he's black, and I can't imagine how he must be feeling. But he posted this picture of, or he was just taking a lot of pictures as he was walking around his city, and uh, it's a piece of plywood over a window of a store, and it's written, "This plywood is a testimony to racial disparity, poverty, and our materialism." And I thought that was just, I don't know, it just felt so profound. Um, Unfortunately, or well, hopefully it doesn't fall to hopefully it doesn't fall to deaf ears. All these messages.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to.
Hopefully you don't see it. Hopefully it doesn't become a situation of rooftop Koreans, as they've become to be known, and the LA riots, which put a stake through Korean and African American uh, like relations. It's it's this needs to be an opportunity for us to come together stronger, not create divides in each other, and um, yeah, maybe looting the Chanel is the way to do it. That's the place.
That's absolutely the play. Hit the people with lots and lots and lots and lots of extra capital to lose, or at least where the top of the employees at the top of that company have lots and lots and lots to lose. So they'll be able to open that store back up again.
Oh man, who we're like in our team call. We were mentioning some larger companies that haven't really made a stance or said anything. If you look at the Hershey's of the world, the Nestle's, I'm curious how a company like a Boeing or United Airlines will respond to any of this.
I think there was floated the idea that that there's nothing there's nothing political about taking a stand here, but I do think the unfortunate reality is that 50% of this country is it's 50% of the voting age people in this country are willing to allow this to be a political thing.
Yeah,
Um, and
bipartisanship.
and and they will turn it into a reason not to buy Hershey's for a day, and then they'll go back to buying Hershey's or whatever it is. But
I know.
there, the there are parts of this country where if you haven't been there, you really need to make an effort to go, because um, if I go 10 or 15 miles in just about any direction from where I am that isn't towards Tacoma or Seattle, I'm going to bump into Confederate flags in people's backyards. And that's in Washington State.
Right.
We had no part in the Civil War. If you go do that same trip in Georgia, uh, shit gets scary real quick. Um, it's not as everybody wants to imagine it's all over, and that we're kind of all enlightened at this point, and you're just not bumping into those people because you're not living near them, because you're young, or you stick to the areas that are kind of progressive and require working together. It seems like cities which require a lot of cooperation, you don't get as many of those xenophobic people. But if you go, most of this country is uh, backwoods, rural. Um, the cities only cover a small amount, and there's a lot of people that aren't in them. And which is
Absolutely.
not to stereotype those people, because I grew up outside of a city, sort of in the woods, and they're obviously not all like that, but um, don't don't feel as though the other side isn't actually there, because I think people who try, there's this narrative that then things like, not that I think Antifa is well, one, an organization that actually isn't an organization, but two, that they're justified in what they do. But those who are saying that there's no reason to have a group that opposes fascism in this country are utterly mistaken about the realities of the types of people that exists outside of the communities that you're getting your eyes on.
Yeah, ab- absolutely. It, and without knowledge, without seeing all those sides, it's hard to make. I mean, that's how people could become more compassionate. Yeah, to be able to understand all those sides. If every single person was able to see the issues and not necessarily like fully understand it, because I think that's impossible unless you are of whatever it is, a specific race, a specific socioeconomic class from a specific place, but to at least build that empathy by seeing them, by trying to understand them, by exposing yourself to it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, people who have never left their small town or have only visited the cities and got scared a few times, um, uh, are they're missing, I think, something fundamental that's really hard to an experience that's hard to gain, and I think that's where you get those ideas that just ingrain themselves in these communities where people aren't really going to leave, which again, I think there's a lot of good qualities about small towns as well that you don't get from the cities. But if you come from a primarily homogenous area, make sure your children experience other things, um, big cities, other communities. Go travel and see people that don't have your skin tone, because I think there's such a close mindedness about what it's even like to be in a city like Los Angeles, for example, or New York, where you're not you're not you're not as if you're a rural Caucasian human going out into the world, like it's you should understand that that's not the only way to live, and there are tons and tons of other various cultures that uh, live in your country, and they
Hmm.
are just as American as you are.
Hmm. Yeah, it answers the question the the what it means to be American, and the answer is that there is no real answer.
Right. That's the idea, or it should be the idea.
100%.
Everyone's an American,
We
should
just
they
have to.
choose to be.
Should they choose to be? Should they? It at the end of the day, it's whatever the guiding principles are. It's not defined by any racial attribute because all of us are here. But it's the rights, the principles, the morals, those things that we fight for that make us profoundly American. um, what are some resources? Do you know of any resources off the top of your head where people could donate, where people could be part of the movement?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've always been a fan of Oprah, so I went with the link from Oprah magazine for uh, where to send. Although, caveat that I'm not a fan of Oprah's quote end quote uh,
Book club.
what her like pseudoscience
Oh
type
yeah, she's kind of been
cronies.
yeah, she's kind of been going off the deep end on that. On that. There's also was it the Million Little Threads or Million Little? She
Yeah,
does bring people without fact checking.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. She makes some mistakes, but God, if I don't love her.
She's human.
Um,
She may
so
be Oprah, but she's
yeah,
still human.
yeah, one of us. Uh, George Floyd's brother has started a GoFundMe to assist his family in their time of need. Um, that's gofundme.com/f/George Floyd. Um, I would, I, I'm sure that the family has a means of distributing, like, if they get an excess here, but I would encourage people to, if you go to this page and that number is super, super high, like, oh yeah, like almost $8 million, then um, maybe start looking at some other ones, like there's Minnesota Freedom Fund.org,
Hmm.
um, which is to help low income people post bail. NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. This will be helping with legal fees incurred by those who are protesting. That is, oh boy, never mind. I can't give you a quick link for that. I apologize.
We could post all these in the description if
Yeah, yeah,
anything as
that'll
well.
work.
Um,
Um, Communities United Against Police Brutality is going to be at cuapb.org. Um, and then there are some means of signing petitions and speaking to the Minneapolis officials. And I would say, just search Oprah, let's see, help. Um, what did I search to get this? George Floyd donation Oprah. Um, we'll get you a page full of this, as is probably the quickest way to find all these.
Perfect. And we'll have an ongoing compiled list probably on that we'll just put on the Neuro website as well. Uh, that in no way are we trying to like promote. It's not as a means of promotion of our product by any means. Purely as just a resource. And this is something I'll probably post on my own personal Instagram as well. Um, there's yeah, the Black Vision Fund is the one I contributed to personally. Um, but any of these, it's a collective movement. All of us are working together, and uh, just it's be safe, be smart, be the change you want to see in the world.
And if your parent or grandparent says that these people were just looking for an excuse to loot, go ahead and kick them right in the dick.
And that's the most important thing. uh,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
you were ending it much better
We need,
than my.
as you've said, we're the type of people where we need the humor to deal with the hopelessness.
Yeah, I'm also just sitting on a lot of anger right now, so
Oh,
I'll just try to keep it isolated to
it's very
small.
unlike you, Tyler, to promote dick kicking. You've changed.
I used to be so calm.
Uh,
All right,
man,
well, yeah, I suppose that'll be our show for this week. Thanks for listening. Sorry if you were expecting to laugh more, but I think I think it's worth keeping you guys in tune with what we're actually feeling and thinking
Mm-hmm.
about. So, this will conclude our special episode, and we will be back next week with our very 18th episode.
18. Wow.
We're going to kick our podcast out of the house and tell it to go pay its own bills.
Yeah. It's going to start smoking cigarettes, buying lotto tickets. Oh, gosh.
I just don't want it to make the mistakes I made.
Podcast. Be the change you want to be.
Yeah.
All right. Well, look out for those links. Again, be safe. Kick some jerks in the dick, and stay hopeful.
Yeah. Let's figure out how to fix it so we don't have to be sad anymore.
I like that plan. All right. Bye.
Later, everyone.
Say that progress is being made. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. If you pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that's a blow made. And they haven't even begun to pull a knife out, much less try and heal the wound. They won't even admit the knife is there.